Tom DeHaas, OSU Extension, Lake County, Ohio. Here to talk to you today about the difference between tree of heaven and sumac and some other lookalikes. So go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you're seeing this. And so the goal of today is to try to talk about tree of heaven and the difference between that, sumac, and some other lookalikes. And I'll explain why that's important. So tree of heaven, who cares? Isn't that invasive? Okay, and I would agree that it isn't invasive, but it also is the favored host of spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive that's probably on its way here as we speak to Ohio from Pennsylvania, either on a rail car or on a truck or freeway or whatever. And spotted lanternfly was a presentation that was given last week by Amy Stone. Did a great job on explaining the spotted lanternfly, some of the life cycle issues with that, and you know, how we can kind of connect the dots with that and tree of heaven. So there is a really good pest alert that was put out by USDA on spotted lanternfly, but I like this picture on here because it shows a picture of the adult when it kind of gets antagonized and the wings spread out. You can see that that kind of lantern look to it, a Japanese lantern look. So that is the female or the adult when it is when it's excited. The distribution, well, it actually came from China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. So kind of that the Asian area over there, and made its way here in 2014, as most insects do. They cross the barrier of the ocean, be it a container or whatever. But 2014, it was found in the Philadelphia area, Pennsylvania, and it has continued to spread, and now it has been detected in Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, and Virginia. Our fear is that Ohio may be the next in that process. So concerned that that is going to unfold and become one of our next invasives. Why do we suspect that? Well, if we look at the map here, we can see Pennsylvania, and we see where the infestations are right now in the quarantined area. But mostly, if we look to the far left of this picture, we can see in Beaver and Allegheny County, we have some infestations there. The fear is that those areas are right on the border of Ohio. So that being said, those two areas down around, you know, Mahoney, Youngstown, Warren area are right across the border from us. Why does that matter? Well, up in northeastern Ohio, where I am actually from, we have a great wine industry, and the Grand River Valley is all along the Grand River, and it's known for its fine wine grapes and the vineyards that are along 307 in that area up there. If you look at this map that I have up on the screen, down in the bottom right-hand corner where the plus and the minus, the zoom in button is, you'll see the words Beaver Falls. That is actually Beaver County, PA. So not too far away from us. Now the spotted lanternfly would not fly all the way to Lake County or Ashtabula County, but it can travel on rail cars, on trucks, on campers. And so the fear is that egg masses will appear on rocky surfaces and be transported all throughout the state. So that's our greatest fear. Again, as we look at the map, we can see that we're right on that Ohio border with Allegheny and Beaver County right there. So we are very concerned. I'm on a task force that we're talking about spotted lanternfly. And so now we move to today's topic. So tree of heaven. Tree of heaven is actually one of the preferred hosts for spotted lanternfly, as well as grapes. So we have some pictures of tree of heaven on the right, and we have a picture of grapes on the left. And when we think about the egg masses, they will lay egg masses. Some of this got that kind of a shiny surface to it. And you can begin to see when that shiny surface begins to wear off, it exposes the eggs that are underneath that, which is very different than gypsy moth. Gypsy moth is going to have more of a, not furry, but more of a silky covering to it. And so those are, it's easy to tell the difference between those two, not only by color, but also the surface. So again, spotted lanternfly, when we think about what we have a couple of different end stars that it goes through. The first end star is going to be black, and it will continue to evolve into another nymphal stage. There is a red stage, and then finally the, so we move from that black to red and then to the mature adult. The fear is, when we look at the generation, there's only one generation per year, but if you look at where the eggs are most prevalent, they start, the eggs can be existent from September all the way through May. So it's a very long egg stage that they're present in. And then the nymphs are going to become active in late April. I think we said about growing degree day 200 or 250. And they'll be active through the summer until they turn into adults. And the adult phase goes from about end of July to late December. The fear is that, and when we're talking about grapes, about the time when they're going to be laying eggs is about the same time when the grapes are going to be being harvested. So that September, October, if you look at the egg stage up on top there, that's when the eggs are being laid. That's when fruit is being picked from the vineyards. And so when you look at some of the chemistries that we have to control that, most of them have a pre-harvest interval that would prevent us from spraying and then harvesting the grapes. So it's kind of a, they compete against each other. We want to get our grapes in, but we also want to control our insect pest. And then we have the life stages. We have the eggs are laid, again, September through June, a long period there. Egg hatch is going to be April to June. We have that nymphal stage, and then we have the fourth end star is going to be that red nymph, or the red nymphal stage is going to be that red end star, and then instar, and then the adults. There is an app for that. So what I would encourage you to do is on your phone, if you look up, and again, you can't find it under GLEDN. If you type that in, it doesn't go to your phone. So if you type in Great Lakes EDN, Great Lakes EDN, which stands for Early Detection Network, you can go ahead and find that on Great Lakes Early Detection Network. And the kind of cool thing about this app is not only can you send them pictures of what you suspect might be spotted lanternfly, but you can also send them pictures of what you think might be tree of heaven, which gets us to the topic of today. So, tree of heaven. So tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima is a pretty, it's not native here. Okay, it was native it came in from immigrants that came here from to the West Coast in the 1850s. It was imported in the area 1784 by immigrants. So, you know, we have kind of this tree that's been around for a while, but we found out that it's invasive. And if you look at the picture of what makes it invasive, it's these seed pods. Very prolific seeder, and the seeds can find their ways to propagate it pretty easily. So again, it was introduced into Philadelphia in 1784, and it's a very good identification sheet from Penn State. If you type in Penn State University Tree of Heaven, it'll bring up the sheet. So what's the big deal? The big deal is these guys. And if without these guys, we don't have this. So the concern is that if we don't find the spotted lanternfly early enough, that it will devastate our grape industry. So let's get to the topic. Staghorn sumac and tree of heaven. So they do tend to be confused at times. I find it interesting that up in Lake County, Ohio, we have both Tree of Heaven and Staghorn sumac, and they seem to grow in the same place, which I'll show you in my pictures. So this is Staghorn sumac. That's the fruit of the Staghorn sumac. And you can see that that is kind of a red, fuzzy drupe fruit that sticks up in the air. This is a winter picture of Tree of Heaven, and those are the seed pods. And you're going to begin to start to see some differences. And I would say this, that the purpose of this video is to try to encourage you to start looking for it. They will both be in flower flower producing seed about the same time in that mid-July area. And if you can identify it then, or look for it then, you're going to begin to see Tree of Heaven everywhere, which is what happened to me last year. So this is the fruit on Tree of Heaven that's kind of hanging on this year. Above this, this is actually Route 20, right, going into Painesville. Staghorn sumac does retain its fruit in the winter. Tree of Heaven tends to lose its seed pods. And when they go together, you can begin to see the difference. So here we have the seed clusters of Tree of Heaven. Some of them have kind of held on, but most of them have fallen off. And you see just the empty places where the seeds were attached. But when you see them together, you can see the Staghorn sumac in the foreground is still showing its drupe fruit, still kind of hangs on, whereas behind that, the Tree of Heaven has all of those empty seed pods have dispersed. Staghorn sumac looks like this. This was taken probably 2 weeks ago, so it would have been that last week of March. And this is the seed head on the Tree of Heaven. But really, if there's nothing else that you remember from this webinar, remember this. It's the bud scar of Tree of Heaven. It is that heart-shaped bud scar. And once you see that, you're going to be able to identify this pretty easily. And believe it or not, you'll be able to identify it when you're driving in a car. And not only from the flower, but also the bud scars, you can begin to see this. It begins to jump out at you. It'll retain that heart-shaped bud scar even when it's older. So this is probably a 2 or 3 year old branch, and this is maybe a 4-year-old branch. It'll maintain it all the way through there. So it maintains that kind of a heart-shaped bud scar all the way. Sumac fruit, we have this. The sumac bud scar is much different. It does not have that heart shape, and the bud scar surrounds the bud. Okay, so Ailanthus in the winter, we have these empty pods. And again, we can see, and that's what I tried to point out, is that for whatever reason around our area, sumac and Tree of Heaven tend to grow together. So we have sumac in the foreground, Tree of Heaven in the background. And again, you see the differences between the seed heads. So this is the winter form of sumac. There's another winter picture. The trunk of Tree of Heaven is going to have kind of this fissure bark. The trunk on sumac is going to be smooth. And so you can begin to see a difference on the trunk. These are both about the same diameter, maybe 8 inches, 6 to 8 inches. So Tree of Heaven versus sumac, how do you tell the difference? Well, Staghorn sumac is native to Ohio, and it's a great naturalizer plant. And Tree of Heaven is very aggressive. But when you see them in flower, and when I show you the pictures of them being in flower, that's really the key. So Staghorn sumac, Rus typhina, it's attractive. It's a woodline plant. Tree of Heaven, Ailanthus, has a flower cluster that cascades down. But when you see them, you'll be able to tell the difference. So just a compare and contrast slide here. The leaves they both have a compound leaf, 1 foot to 4 foot in length on Tree of Heaven, whereas at 1 to 2 foot on Staghorn sumac. Some more leaflets on Tree of Heaven than sumac, but really the key to that is Tree of Heaven has kind of a smooth, lightly pubescent stem, whereas the Staghorn sumac is very pubescent. It's got that very distinct V-shaped heart that's not enclosing the bud, whereas the bud on sumac is enclosed by that U. And then when you crush Tree of Heaven, you do get a very strong odor. So this is the flowers of Tree of Heaven. And there's a good picture of the flower pod. So you can see it up close. It's a very, very different from sumac. You can see that cluster of seeds at the end of that. And the other way to tell the difference is the leaflets on the ailanthus are going to have this notch. So if you look at this notch at the base on both sides of this, you have that kind of a notch, whereas sumac is a serrated leaf. So there's sumac, and that is a flower which is very different right there. That's kind of a seed pod there. And as we move forward, we see there's a serrated leaf on sumac. So that did not, again, that's another defining difference between Tree of Heaven and sumac. Sumac is toothed, Tree of Heaven is smooth. Here's the leaflet on the ground. So that this whole entire compound leaf is composed of leaflets on a main vein. Sumac in early season, it will have this kind of a yellowish to greenish flower, which will end up being this red fruit cluster that is a drupe that sticks up. In the background, you have Tree of Heaven. And again, if you start to see these growing together, you can pretty much be very, very definitive on what is what as you look at them growing. So again, spotted lanternfly, why are we worried about this? Well, they're phloem feeders, which means they will pierce the phloem or pierce the stem, and they will feed, and that sap will drip out. They're very heavy feeders, so they not only will they feed and the tree will bleed, but they produce honeydew, which can cause sooty mold. It will attract bees and wasps to the sweetness of the honeydew. So very similar to other honeydew producing insects, this is one that will cause sooty mold and cause that to occur on the sweetness of the extract coming out of the insect. Again, the life cycle, we talked about that. And the Great Lakes Early Detection Network, I asked you to encourage us. So let's move forward and explain what we're doing here in Lake County to try to identify this. So what we've done is, or what I've done is I've gone to all around Lake County and tried to identify where spotted lanternfly exist. So this is a partial list of what I came up with. Interestingly enough, a lot of these places are not too far away from railroad tracks. We have a CSX and a Norfolk and Southern track that runs right through Lake County, and they run side by side. And for whatever reason, maybe it's the industrial veg control that happens along railroad tracks and the right of ways where they spray a lot. These trees seem to find their way. They do grow in a very harsh location, but these are locations that we've identified. So let's say that you thought you saw Tree of Heaven, but you weren't sure if it was Tree of Heaven. Well, you can go to your app and you can pull up, on your app, you can pull up a camera, you can take a picture and you can send it and say, I think this is Tree of Heaven, I'm not sure, and they'll identify it. Same thing you do if you think you saw an invasive species or spotted lanternfly, you can take a picture. And the nice thing about this app is it does put a lawn and a lat on the picture that you sent. So these are all identified places that have Tree of Heaven. To give you an idea of this Tree of Heaven, this is actually growing on the subway in downtown Madison. These are actually two driveways that are two parking lots that meet up with each other. And that tree is growing right in the middle of those two parking lots and looking pretty happy growing there. So this is a Tree of Heaven. So it unlike sumac, Tree of Heaven can grow into a pretty large tree. Here's another picture of one that's very close to the railroad tracks on Lane Road in Perry. And when I went through to scout these trees, I did identify them with a tag that says Tree of Heaven on them. The hope is that at some point in time in the future, we will deploy our master gardeners when we're allowed to, and see if they can go ahead and have scout for that, which would be great. This whole cluster of trees by the Fairport Harbor Yacht Club are all Tree of Heaven, and those are trees that are growing together in a cluster. If you look at the very top of that picture, you can see some of those seed pods or the seed heads that were left over from that. So what are some other lookalikes that we have to Tree of Heaven? So one of the things we talked about yesterday on the phone call that we had with the ODNR, and ODA and some of the other people involved in the spotted lanternfly is there are more than just sumac that looks like Tree of Heaven. So we'll go through a couple of these. Juglans nigra is black walnut. Again, a difference here, not as many leaflets, but also a serrated leaf. If we look close at this, it does have a slight serration on the leaf, whereas Tree of Heaven is a smooth leaf, except for those two little lobes at the end. And the bark on black walnut is fissured like this, pretty deeply fissured. But the flowers, very, very different on walnut. You have these kind of a drooping down raceme that comes down, and not that way on Tree of Heaven or sumac. And then the fruit, which is the walnut. So, and then the bud scar is not a heart-shaped bud scar like we had on Tree of Heaven. It's more of a rounded, whereas Tree of Heaven has that very heart shape on the bud scar. Some other lookalikes, and initially when I saw Acer Negundo, I thought, nah, that doesn't look anything like Tree of Heaven. Well, when we did that, when I looked at it, I said, why would this be confused? But if we go a little further, it's the seeds. When you look at the seed heads on this particular plant, this doesn't look too bad, but when you see this, I can see how that seed production could be confused with Tree of Heaven. But again, these are samaras that are linked in the middle. They're in pairs, and so maple should not be confused. 3 leaflets on a leaf. Yeah, but the main thing, a maple is opposite, not alternate, whereas Tree of Heaven is a alternate leaves on the stem. So there is a great Penn State fact sheet, which I've referred to before, on Tree of Heaven. This would be a good place to find some of that information. And this is where I got some of the ones that could be confused. Another one is going to be hickory, so juglans. We look at that, and hickory is it's got that compound leaf. But again, you look at the leaflet here, a little broader at the midsection of the leaf, whereas Tree of Heaven was a little more uniform. Another leaflet there on bitternut. Now the bark on bitternut hickory is smooth, but the bark on shagbark hickory is kind of shaggy like this. So we, and a lot of us have seen that this is a pretty common tree in northeastern Ohio, shagbark as well as bitternut hickory. So we have those. We have the bud scar, again, is not that heart-shaped. And then we would have the fruit, which is actually shagbark hickory nuts. So that actually concludes my presentation. I would encourage you, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at my email address, dehaz.2@osu.edu, and I will talk to you soon. Hope you have a good day. Thanks. And we will see you.